My grandmother and my mother were great gardeners. They had what we call green fingers. They can turn any dying plant into a thriving plant. My mom always had a vegetable patch where she would grow peppers and tomatoes and onions and all sorts of herbs. It was a sacrilege in our house if we ever run out of pepper. That's not possible. There would be a pepper plant somewhere in the garden absolutely thriving. We grew habanero pepper. We grew a special pepper called osensuka, which is a yellow, very, very hot pepper. We grew all sorts. The same for my grandma. My grandma even extended it further because she had a huge plot in the village. She would grow cassava, yam, pepper, all sorts of beautiful different types of vegetable and crops. And another thing with my grandma, she's known as a local medicine woman, so she had all sorts of herbs in her garden to treat all manner of ailments. And so when it came to my gardening journey, I was a little bit apprehensive. I spoke to my mom, and I remember speaking to my grandma when I was very young, and she would always say to me, "Don't fret, do not sweat it, don't worry about it. If a plant is not thriving, just leave it. Nature will tend to that plant." And I remember that lesson when I was starting my gardening journey. Of course, I had my mom on speed dial. Why wouldn't I? And I would complain all the time. "Oh, I think the onions is just gone. I think the tomato is done for. As for the herbs, forget about it. Nothing is happening to the basil. The Italian basil is just well and truly dead." And my mom would always say to me, "Remember what your grandma told you. Remember what I taught you. Don't fret. Do not sweat the little things. Nature has a way of balancing out. As long as you tend to them, you water them, you expose them to sunlight, just don't look at them all the time." So that's exactly what I did. And I was just so surprised at the yield that I had in my just tiny balcony garden. I had tomato for days. I mean, this is my third or fourth harvest, my fourth tomato harvest, my fourth or fifth onion harvest. And the plants just kept producing. So this is a word of encouragement to any would-be gardener out there. And I would just say, like my grandma and my mom would say, believe in the process. Start with one pot. Just plant that herbs, water it, nurture it, put it out in the sunlight, and watch it thrive. So for next year, this is my plan and my pledge for next year. I'm going to start a little bit earlier because this year I started slightly late, and I'm going to be even more adventurous. I'm gonna plant different types of tomatoes, different types of pepper. I would plant cucumber, I would plant courgette, onions of course, and I will try my hand on a little bit of broad beans and things that are more finicky. When it comes to herb, I have a herb garden that goes all year round. So for herbs, I don't think I'm that worried. But for 2025, I will try my best to do something a little bit more extraordinary just to build up. Now I'm a little bit more confident. It is fascinating to me when I cast my mind back to when I was growing up, the experiences I had in my grandmother's garden. And sometimes my grandmother would call me and my cousins and ask us to go to her garden and weed the garden. We would go down there, of course, with all intentions of weeding the said garden. And sometimes we'll go with the gardeners, and the gardeners will say to us, "As long as you guys do one ridge, then that's okay, go off and play." We would play from morning till night, climbing the mango trees, plucking mangoes, eating them unwashed, turning over to the cashew trees, plucking the the cashews, and then most importantly with the cashews, eating them in such a way that it doesn't stain our t-shirts. And of course, if you are from Africa, you will know that if you eat cashew and it touches your dress or your t-shirt, the stain remains permanently. There's something in cashew juice that just really has a tendency of ruining clothes. So those are the little adventures that we had. When we come back, my grandmother will welcome us with open arms. Oh, my little farmers, are you back? What did you get up to? I'm sure you're tired. Come and sit down. Of course, the gardeners, most of them will be rolling their eyes. It's like, yeah, right. Yes, they are so tired. They're so tired. And we will be so proud of ourselves because at least we weeded one ridge, right? Albeit we played for like 5 to 6 hours, getting up to all sorts of adventure. But in between all those playing and, climbing trees and playing catch, I think something stuck. And that thing was the ability to see plants grow from seed all the way to harvesting. The ability to see my grandmom or my granddad's eyes lit up when we bring the harvest home. And they will say things like, my goodness, the yam is so big. Or they will say, my goodness, look at that cassava. And I remember the gardeners, something that is absolutely, it's like a ritual. Sometimes what the gardeners will do is they'll bring the biggest, largest cassava to my grandma, and they'll say things like, Mama, which is what they call her, Mama, look, can you believe how massive this cassava is? It came from one ridge. And everybody will shout and exclaim. So yeah, I think that's my history and story on how I fell in love, totally in love with growing all sorts of things, plants, and I would try as much as I can, obviously, to continue growing. These are my lovely cats, 2 British short hair called Everest and Levi, who are definitely part of the family. They are welcoming me from the farm, or rather from the balcony, and they are saying like, you've been gone so long, what took you so long? You were like 6 hours. Anyway, so we also grow blackberries, or rather blackberries grow wildly in the back garden, and we try to pluck them on a daily basis so that we have them fresh. So we usually have them with yogurt, which is what I'm doing, and it was my break time. I decided to have Greek yogurt and a little bit of freshly plucked blackberry. And if I tell you how delicious this was, it was just, I didn't need to add anything. No honey, no sugar, no extra. Just freshly plucked warm blackberry from the garden and cold Greek yogurt. It was just so delicious. And I'm so grateful, really grateful to be able to have the land space, to be able to have the foresight to plant these, and also know what to do with them, most importantly. So yeah, it was really delicious. I completely enjoyed myself, and that was it. The next storytelling, it's not really a storytelling, it's actually what we do on a yearly basis. We have cooking apples and eating apples at the bottom of the garden. And what I try to do every year is to pluck as many cooking apples as possible, peel them and freeze them, and then use them for apple crumble all through autumn and winter. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. So this is the first batch that came straight from the garden. I just decided to make fresh crumbles for the kids, for myself, and just have something to enjoy. One thing I have to say is no crumble has made it overnight in the house. It all finishes the same day. They're so delicious. I don't know whether I'm not making enough or the appetite in the house is large. Well, there's 4 of us, and the pan I usually tend to make my crumble is super duper small, I think. So maybe I should think about having 2 or 3 pans and making a big batch and freezing it and then just bringing it out. I don't know whether I'm gonna do that or not. But yeah, it was a very busy weekend. Doing the garden, doing a lot of harvesting, pruning things, cutting things back, baking, eating, doing crumbles, just spending time and hanging out with the children. I noticed as I grow older that slow living is something that is becoming more and more alluring to me. I don't know whether it's because I lead a very busy life or because there's a lot happening in the world, but slow living is something that I have pondered and thought about for a very, very long time, and I've decided to adopt even more of slow living in my life. So I usually use autumn to kickstart my slow living lifestyle. Autumn or fall is usually the time that really tries to encourage people to start bedding down as we approach winter. And those rituals is something that I've tried to incorporate over the years, and I think I've almost perfected it. So one trick that I tend to use is to try as much as possible to make my environment a little bit more cozier. So I bring out a couple of blankets, pop off my pillows a little bit more, add more layers, add more texture, woolly textures, things that are not like warm, things that encourage warmth, right? And then another thing I try to do is to incorporate things like candles or hue-like lighting around the house. So it just encourages one to bed down, to be quiet, to be still. And I collect a lot of books, and there are certain books that I would buy over summer that is definitely read around autumn and winter, simply because what I want to do around autumn and winter is just to hunker down, to slow myself down and coil up with a cup of tea and a piece of cake or apple crumble in this case, you get me? And then just get lost in a novel or get lost in one or two hobbies that I'm doing. And when I do that, when I try as much as possible, especially over the weekend, to carve out a little piece of me time and incorporate some of this slow living lifestyle, I find myself truly recharged, ready to face the extremely busy week. If I had to go into London, and London is a maze, seriously, I really need that recharge me time to face obviously the hustle and bustle of work and of life in general. Another thing I try to do in terms of trying to slow myself down is to go for long walks, and these are intentional walks, these are planned walks. So sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm gonna explore this woodland or this hillside or this area, and then we drive all the way down and maybe hike for an hour or two, taking in nature, just appreciating nature, and maybe collecting one or two little seedlings or little leaves or flowers or whatever along the way. And that is sort of like a piece of me time and a piece of sort of like appreciating the slow lifestyle. So it's always a journey, because sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes slow living really doesn't work for me because of how busy life can get. But when I remember, I draw myself back. I really do draw myself back and ask myself that question: how can I slow down my days? How can I just pause and stop making decisions, even if it's for an hour or for 30 minutes? That sometimes helps a little bit. Thank you so much for listening. If you managed to get to this part of the video, thank you so much for getting to this part of the video, and I really appreciate it. Please give this video a thumbs up and please subscribe. I'm trying to see how to obviously get this type of videos out there, so I'm starting out. I'm really grateful for your presence here. Now, one thing I want to touch on is how creating or cooking food helped me explore my creative process. I come from a creative family. We're really creative, but my 9 to 5 doesn't give me the opportunity to be creative. And over the years, what I find myself doing in order to exercise that creative energy that usually surges in me is to have something that I'm doing. So it could be creating a food from scratch and twisting the recipe a little bit just to exercise that creative process, or designing a food, designing a dish and making it look really pretty or something like that. Another way I try to explore my creativity is by exploring my passion, which is collecting antiques. So I'll go into antique shops, look at the stuff, see what I can buy, and then incorporate it into my existing collection. So that way, my creative energy has an outlet, and this has really helped me balance my life for a very, very long time. There is always a creative process happening somewhere in my house on my behalf, whether it's trying to paint or creating a new dish or redesigning the house or moving things around, just even if it's rearranging the sitting room or changing up the balcony, how the balcony looks. Those are all creative outlets and creative spaces. And what you will see is, if you're a creative person and you are able to exercise your creativity one way or the other, you will find yourself living a little bit more of a more meaningful and purposeful life. I struggled for years. I didn't realize that was what was wrong with me, that my creative energy had no outlet. When I realized it and I rebalanced it, it was just such an amazing turnaround. An amazing turnaround. No week passes without me creating. So I try as much as I can to create something. Even if it means moving a pot plant, like changing it, that is creation. Cleaning something and again rearranging it, that is creating. Rearranging your wardrobe is actually creating. Sometimes I find myself color coordinating my wardrobe when I have time. Very, very rare. But yes, most of my creative outlet is moving more and more towards that interior design aspect of things, or garden design aspect of things, or just some form of coloring books or some design concept. So that's how I let my creative energy surge and surge and surge. A lot of experimenting.